welcome to the stage me, host and editor of One Big Thing, Niala Boodhoo. Good morning, Richmond. This is such a great crowd. Thank you all for being here today. As you just heard, I'm Niala Boodhoo. I host Axios' weekly podcast, One Big Thing, and we're so excited that you are here with us this morning to talk about how collaboration can spearhead the future of energy consumption in Virginia and beyond. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome our first speaker this morning. He's the director of Virginia's Department of Energy, Glenn Davis. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the Axios by the numbers when we think about energy demands for Virginia. So by the numbers, natural gas accounted for 54% of in-state electricity net generation. Nuclear power was about 31%, and renewables about 11%.
About 11%, yep.
So what's your overall goal for what you want that balance to look like over the next decade?
Well, over the next decade, the governor's goal is to really bring about small modular reactors. We are seeing the largest growth demand in energy of any state in the nation. It was anticipated a few years ago, our growth demand would be 1% to 2% year over year. Now it's 5.6% year over year. So we've got to bring on technology and innovation to help cover the gap period as we grow, to get to the point where we can have the small modular reactors really pick up that significant amount of clean energy we're going to need as we continue to grow that demand.
Right. And so as we look ahead and think about natural gas production, Virginia's Clean Economy Act establishes 100% renewables by 2045 for Dominion. Is it 2050 for APCO?
It is.
So we always joke that we can't do an Axios event without talking about AI.
Right.
But the reason I want to ask you about that is because of the vast data centers that are needed to power AI. The Wall Street Journal has called Northern Virginia's data center alley ground zero for this. Do you think data centers may be the biggest obstacle to achieving these green energy goals that the state has set?
Well, I wouldn't say it's an obstacle. Data centers are probably the biggest opportunity for Virginia from an economic opportunity, right? Virginia is the data center capital of the world, and we intend to stay that way. And to do so, we have to make sure that we meet the energy demands. Now, that is true, that data centers are a large portion of that 5% year-over-year growth. AI is only going to add to that. So we've got to make sure that we bring the energy demand. Some of the innovation we're seeing and the conversations we're having are large hyperscale data center entities that are willing to bring an SMR or power generation via gas behind the meter, kind of a bring your own power, a BYOP thing, to the table, where they can actually supply power without having to pull it on the grid and put more stress on it.
So from a Virginia Department of Energy standpoint, what do you want big tech to bring to this conversation? And because obviously they're the ones that are kind of using all of this energy.
Bring
big tech. So
big tech. So we want big tech to come here, and AI can actually help solve a lot of some of the challenges we have. One of the biggest challenges that we face is interconnection with PJMQ, right? The regional transmission operator, getting our power generation facilities online quicker to start feeding this grid. AI can help with that tremendously. Additionally, the tech companies, as they come, Google, Microsoft, have joined with Nucor, one of the largest steel manufacturers in the world, to aggregate their demand to help bring about new power generation initiatives. By aggregating demand, being willing to pay over market rates. So they put out an RFI, I guess about a month and a half ago, and they're down selecting to bring some of this new innovation into the PJM market, hopefully Virginia, so we can start developing some of this.
So is the hope that paying over market rate will help create enough power generation that can still be renewable versus fossil fuel?
Well, over market rate is important because of the first of a kind concept. As we all know, that first of a kind of anything, that prototype is always more expensive than once you have the supply chain built out. And when you start looking at things like small modular reactors, we know that first of a kind is going to cost a lot more than what we call nth of a kind. When you've got a supply book of, let's say, an order book of 5 or 6 reactors, now supply chain starts building and it gets a lot less expensive.
So I wanted to take a look at some of the other pieces, and we're talking about renewable. Virginia was just awarded $156 million in the Solar for All. That money's coming through next year. What's the plan there?
So we got a grant for $156 million, It allows solar to be put on single-family and multifamily residences with a focus on underserved communities to supply solar power to them. The requirement is that the facilities that supply that or the projects on the homes have to reduce the bill at least 20%.
Okay.
So it goes right in line with, the governor. For the governor, it's about affordable, reliable, innovative power, and that gives us that affordable piece on there.
So I wanted to ask you about how you sort of balance the needs of the state and thinking about the broader possibility of a party change in Washington. We know former President Trump in Project 2025, which is sort of a plan for his first few days in office, has been very forthcoming about the changes that they expect to enact immediately. And among them is transitioning nuclear energy support to the private sector. And just thinking about that as a possibility, I wanted to ask you how important government support of nuclear energy has been to Virginia.
Well, I think government support and a focus on it has been important. Getting the messaging out there is important. The financial support obviously always helps, but there are entities out there, and Virginia's talking to a couple of them, that don't need additional federal dollars to bring about an SMR at a facility. They need an off-taker that's willing to pay the cost of electricity for that first of a kind to be able to put it into reality. And data centers are prime for that because they have a lot greater or higher price elasticity than a typical, let's say a typical industry would. So they're able to pay a little bit more for that energy, which allows SMRs to become a reality, and a couple of them don't need any more financial support. So, it could help some, but at this point, I think we're on a good pace to get some already into place.
So am I right in saying, it sounds like you're saying it doesn't necessarily make a difference for Virginia if it's private energy versus government?
Well, it's always going to be private entities bringing it to the table.
Sure.
Whether there's federal funding there,
right.
We're going to get it regardless. There's a lot of money coming down. The governor's been very clear. We're going to compete to win, and we're going to bring back as much of Virginia taxpayer dollars as we can to create a reliable and affordable grid in Virginia, as long as that money is up there. But that's not what we're relying on. I mean, if the money's there, we're going to go forward. And if and when that money starts to shut off, we've already got a plan to continue forward to make sure that we have a reliable and affordable grid for Virginians.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like nuclear energy kind of gets lost sometimes in this conversation, as when we're talking about, I feel like from just a general societal standpoint, I want to give you a minute to just sort of give a pitch to nuclear, because I know this is such an important part of Virginia's plan.
Well, that's the one bipartisan piece of all this. Mm-hmm. If you look at a D.C., whether it's the president, the head of the Department of Energy, various Republican, Democratic governors, everyone has said that nuclear energy is the way we have clean energy across our Commonwealth, across the nation. It is the key to reliable, affordable, energy grids. And so, a number of states are looking to move forward on that, and we need it. That really is, I don't want to call it the silver bullet, but it's pretty close to that silver bullet. Where I think sometimes it gets lost a little bit is because of the demand we're seeing, we've got to get to that point. SMRs are about 10 years away still from having that first SMR. And when you see the growth in energy demand at 5% plus year over year, you're going to have a gap in there around years 4 through 8, 4 through 9 that you're going to have to continue to fill. And the question is, how do you fill that until I can get to an SMR facility? But once we get to year 12 and we have the SMRs and we have a real supply chain, that really becomes a significant game changer.
So in that gap year, how do you foresee sort of meeting both the demands that have been set forward by the state legislature for that to be not fossil fuel?
Right.
And we're hearing energy companies saying, no, this has to be fossil fuel generated.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. The problem that was created, it's a very simple problem. Virginians, like all Americans, we like more technology, more TVs in the house. We like internet access and all this, so we have a greater demand on energy. At the same time, some politicians cut supply. And that gets to be a problem, right? And so how do we solve that? And the conversation, I believe, is having more conversations around natural gas. The head of the U.S. Department of Energy came out recently and said that natural gas will be used well beyond 2050. And I believe, and this governor believes, that they're 100% right. And so we have to have that conversation in Virginia, because wind is great, solar is inexpensive, but when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, you still want your lights to come on. And if we're not using coal, what is baseload power? What is the power that is guaranteed to be there 24/7? And that's natural gas. And so there are conversations being had in Virginia of, can we put more focus on helping clean the natural gas scenario, and the industry is already hitting there, as opposed to an outright ban in 2045 or 2050, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. You were previously in the State House.
Always.
We're here in the state capitol. What's your message to state lawmakers now that you're on sort of the other side, being in the Department of Energy, as they're thinking about crafting these laws?
It's all about the data. It's when the Virginia Clean Economy Act was passed, the people that passed it, they were friends of mine, and we disagreed on a lot of things, right? But they had good intentions. They wanted a clean energy economy, and we can all appreciate that. But there wasn't the data there, and they thought we're looking at a 1% to 2% year-over-year growth. We're at 5.6, and whenever the data changes, you have to make a new decision. And that's where we find ourselves. And there are Republican and Democrat legislators right now having these conversations, because ultimately we may want a good soundbite, but having walked the state of Virginia many times and knocked on a lot of doors, Republicans and Democrats, we may disagree where we want our energy from. We may disagree on what we think we should retire. We all agree on one thing. When we hit that light switch, we want the lights to come on. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get to that solution.
Of course, we're talking about all of this because we are thinking about greenhouse gas emissions, the climate. I wanted to ask you about energy resiliency, especially when we talk about extreme weather events. Mm-hmm. I was just, I have family in Michigan. I was just looking at sort of like all the really horrific tornadoes that were happening across the Midwest yesterday. What keeps you up at night thinking about the grid in Virginia, in particular when it comes to extreme weather events?
So what keeps me up at night is the fact of realizing that we are not self-sufficient. We are a member of PJM. PJM is 13 states north of Virginia, well, very, very small part of North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. We do not create enough power in Virginia for our needs in Virginia. We get some of our power off that regional grid from other states, and we share as needs happen. If a large northeaster comes through or a winter storm comes through, and we're tied to the northern states, chances are if we get hit hard, they get hit hard. Where does our power come from? Can we survive without having rolling blackouts, or blackouts in general, a Texas-type storm? And that's what keeps me and my agency up at night. Mm-hmm. And the governor and the chief of staff, when we talk about the challenge we have, it's that Virginia is not in a vacuum, that we're relying on on decisions made by other states. And so when you see other states get rid of baseload power, we can't have 13 states thinking that solar and wind's going to solve everything for us. So we've got to work and make sure that we understand the threats across this regional transmission grid.
Mm-hmm. I mean, part of today is talking about collaboration. Do you feel like there's enough collaboration between states? This has sort of always traditionally been a problem, right? You share a grid, but not necessarily like an infrastructure for speaking to each other. Do you feel like that exists?
There's more collaboration coming around now.
Okay.
If you take it back a decade, I just started in the General Assembly, but I don't perceive that these conversations were being had a decade ago. We're in a different place now. We're seeing grids being stressed out, and we're seeing situations where we're losing baseload power. And that's causing, I think, more collaboration among states inside of these regional grids.
So one last question for you. You're from Virginia Beach.
Yes.
You and I were talking before about coastal level sea rise. I just want to end by asking how you feel Virginia state government, the Department of Energy, but in general, is sufficiently positioned to help local municipalities deal with climate resiliency and problems.
So a couple of things. The government under the prior administrations and this administration has put significant monies into sea level rise and modeling and flooding. I spent 5 years on Virginia Beach City Council before going into the state legislature. And one thing we realized when you see sea level rise is real, it's a readiness issue for the military down there. But when you see flooding, a lot of the reason for the flooding isn't just sea level rise. If you go into an area and you look at the water and sewage infrastructure, and you realize what density of housing that was built for, and you realize you're double and triple that. And then you realize that those pipes haven't been cleaned in some cases 30 years. So we cleaned our pipes in Virginia Beach, our sewage infrastructure. Some of them were clogged 40%. It's amazing what you actually see down in your sewer system, right? So a lot of the flooding that we see in a lot of these urban areas isn't necessarily because of sea level rise. It's because we have overbuilt for the water and sewage system that we created. And, concrete and asphalt doesn't absorb water. It runs off into what it can find. And what it can find is your front yard. So
always comes back to infrastructure.
Yes, it does.
We have to end with that. Glenn Davis, Director of Virginia's Department of Energy, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much.